Story 1. It was finals season once again, and for once, I wanted to pull an all-nighter to ace my organic chemistry finals, so, at past 11 p.m., I headed out of my dorm and into the Vanderbilt library. It was eerily quiet for a school night, and I encountered barely anyone on my way there. Vanderbilt was even emptier. Seeing as it was my first time going there this late, I was surprised to see that there were not many people inside despite it being a 24/7 library. In fact, there was no one in sight from the entrance except the librarian, whom I was amiable. As I neared the librarian's desk, I greeted her. "Hey, Miss Diana. Fancy seeing you here." Her eyes gleamed. She looked a lot happier than usual, especially for someone who was having a night shift. "Hey, Eloise. Here to study for finals?" she asked in her usual squeaky voice. I nodded and explained that I aimed to pull an all-nighter. With that, she wished me luck and I headed farther into the library to find a space. Although the library was so very empty, it was still freezing cold and the air conditioners seemed to be on full blast still. It was so unnaturally quiet that I could hear my own breathing and the blast of the aircon. It was not until I reached the back section that I finally decided to settle in. I busied myself setting up my laptop and my iPad. I also rummaged through my bag to get my books out. Finally, I plopped down to study, but to my surprise, there was another person in a far corner studying. He was sitting a few rows away from me, but we were essentially facing each other. I was positive that he was not there when I settled in because I could have sworn I was alone. That was why I picked this far spot, so I could be as secluded as possible. The man was decked out in a shabby flannel and his hair was covered by a beanie. His face was mostly hidden behind a book. I gazed at him skeptically but decided to go about my work, not wanting to waste any more time. As soon as I started reading, I could feel the stranger's gaze on me. Every now and then I would look up in an attempt to catch him in the act, but I could not catch him staring straight at me. It seemed that every time I looked up, his eyes would instantaneously shift elsewhere. I decided to ignore him and focus on my work, but the air in the library was getting so cold that it was starting to get uncomfortable. I was fidgety, but as soon as I subconsciously started tapping my pen over the table, the noise reverberated throughout the room. It was pin drop silence at this point, so I decided not to fidget anymore. To my surprise, the man started tapping his foot on the floor, as if following my cue of fidgeting. It was a staccato beat, very consistent, and did seem to not be stopping anytime soon. I glared at him at once at his inconsideration, and although he did not meet my eye, he stopped tapping his foot at once. I only had a brief few minutes of peaceful studying when the fidgeting started again. This time, it was a new rhythm, but still constant and irksome. I looked up, expecting to see the man a few seats in front of me purposely tapping his foot on the floor as if to provoke me. Surprisingly, he was not tapping the floor. His foot was perfectly still, no noise coming from his hand. But what was even more surprising is despite his stillness, the tapping sound carried on. I looked behind me, looking for the source of the noise since it was apparently not from the man. But there was not a single soul in sight. From where we were sitting, I could not even see Miss Diana. We were that far into the library. I turned back, ready to continue studying when I suddenly met eye to eye with the man. One moment, he was in his seat, a few rows away from mine, and the next moment, he was standing right there by my seat. His face was so adjacent to mine that I could see the large pores on his skin. He had a pockmarked face and an emotionless expression. My eyes bulged and my skin crawled at the sight of his face being so close. He extended his hand and offered me my pen. I must have dropped it when I looked around for the source of the irritating tapping. "Thank you," I whispered, taking the pen from his hand. He headed back to his seat and I attempted to calm myself down at the odd encounter. The man was making me extremely uncomfortable, but I reasoned that he must be a student to be able to enter the library, so I felt more at ease at the thought. I figured I needed a breather and I also wanted to stretch, so I decided to abandon the table and browse through some of the books in the science section. Just as I was browsing through, I did a double take when I saw a pair of eyes in the small crevice between the shelves. It was the same man and he was in the aisle next to where I was standing. He was not even browsing and neither did he pretend to. He was staring straight at me. Petrified at his spine-chilling gaze, I briskly walked towards my seat. To my horror, the man had now moved from his place at the corner to the seat directly in front of me. He was in the same, unmoving stance as he was earlier. But this time, he was not pretending to read the book and shooting discreet glances at me. He was straight up staring at me, not uttering a single word. I did not know what made me more uncomfortable, his gaze or his rugged features. Perhaps it was both. Nonetheless, I knew I wanted to get out of there. Maybe I was better off studying in my dorm, locked up, and not having to endure some stranger blatantly gawking at me without uttering a single word. With this, I swiftly packed up. The stranger kept his gaze at me the entire time, and I could only pray that he did not follow me on the way out. Thankfully, I did not hear his footsteps as I approached the entrance, where I saw Miss Diana and felt an immediate sense of relief. Miss Diana was carrying her bag and just plopped down behind the librarian's desk when I approached her. "Misty, I better be heading back. Turns out the all-nighter I was telling you about won't work for tonight," I joked. Deep down, I was just relieved to see a figure of authority after my creepy encounter at the back of the library. "Oh hey, Elle. All-nighter? You? Since when?" Miss Diana said playfully. Puzzled, I looked at her. I had just explained my goal to study all night for my finals tomorrow, technically today since it was already 1:30, and she had already forgotten? Perhaps, she was joking. "You must be really tired from your shift, Miss Diana. You've been here for like how many hours already? You should rest too," I suggested. "You're funny, Elle," she replied. "Why would I be tired already? I just got here." Story 2. My friends and I have been looking forward to this overnight trip for ages. After a stressful semester in school, we just wanted to get away, even just for a night. Thankfully, my best friend Bianca found an affordable cabin listing on Airbnb. At last, peace and ambience at a distant place, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, even for just one night. Or so we thought. I started driving to head to the cabin while my best friends, Bianca, Chelsea, and Dixie blasted music away. I could already feel that this was going to be one hell of a night, and I could hardly wait to unwind after all the stress that school had brought me. The road to Leonard Woods was rocky and unfamiliar, so thank goodness we had journeyed in the afternoon, so it was not as frightening. A few hours of drive later, and just as I thought we were nearing our destination, Chelsea announced that she has lost her phone signal and consequently, was unable to use her phone to navigate. Bianca and Dixie soon lost their phone signals too. I suppose it was because we were in such a secluded and elusive portion of town. At this point, I was starting to get uneasy as the roads were becoming narrower and more unknown. It was also starting to get dark and eerie, so I just wanted to reach the cabin as soon as possible. But finding where it was seemed nearly impossible due to our lack of phone signal. "Maybe we should ask a passerby," Dixie suggested as we journeyed through the dark, unsettling roads. I started driving a little slower, scanning the surroundings for anyone we could approach. A few minutes of slow drive and much precaution, we finally stumbled upon a man who was merely standing under an oak tree. He was staring into nothingness, and the four of us looked at each other, unsure if we should approach him. "What choice do we have, right?" asked Bianca, and so I pulled up. "Sir," I called out as I rolled down my window. Nothing. No response. Not even a glance towards our car. "Sir," I repeated, louder this time around. Suddenly, the man looked up. My companions jerked in response, and I took a deep breath as I took in his appearance. He had disheveled hair and his clothes were very worn, as though he had gone through the muddiest of roads and had not washed up for days. His eyes were bloodshot and his face was smudged with dirt on the sides. "Sir, may we ask you for directions to Cabin de la Paz?" The caretaker said. "It's along Road 42 of these woods. Straight ahead and then turn left, then another left," he said shortly. He had a deep, bone-chilling voice. Not wanting to spend another minute in his proximity, I quickly thanked him and drove off. The silence in the car after the encounter was chilling. That was odd, and everybody knew it. I followed the man's instructions and entered deeper into the woods with the 2 left turns. At this point, even the radio signal was cut as the music in the stereo had stopped playing. It was more sinister now as the sun had finally fully set and it was pitch black. I drove for a while, attempting to stick to the direction the man had mentioned, but to no avail. It seemed like we were going in loops, unable to decipher the turns because of the rockiness of the road. To aggravate matters, there was also no other light source in the surroundings except for my headlights. "Where is it?" I asked the group. No one had a clue. "There. Let's see if we can ask someone." "Maybe the old hag didn't know what he was saying," Chelsea said as she spotted a small shed. Finally, another source of light in these dark, eerie woods. We approached what seemed to be a carpenter's shed and spotted an old man hand-sawing some wood. He did not even look up when our car pulled up. He was dressed in a somewhat filthy flannel and looked worn out. "Sir? Can we ask for directions? We're looking for Cabin de la Paz in Road 42, I inquired. At once, he looked up and those familiar bloodshot eyes met once again. Beside me, Bianca stifled a scream. The others in the back seat looked out the window and also came to the realization. That man bore the exact same face as the man we had seen earlier under the oak tree. Was it the same person? How did he get so deep into the woods that quickly when he was walking so aimlessly along the road kilometers away just minutes before? Straight ahead until you see a small house, left, and then left, he said flatly before returning to work. Terrified, I quickly drove away from the shed. What do we do? Should we follow his instructions? I questioned the girls. We are so deep into the woods and it's going to get even more creepy. I think he's our best shot, answered Dixie. Great, let's all just ignore the fact that we literally just saw that exact same man on the main road and now he's suddenly here? Said Bianca. I ignored the chatter and followed the carpenter's instructions out of sheer desperation. At that point, I just wanted to get to the cabin. How could any of us have known that it was located so far from civilization? No wonder the rent was cheap. It was not only a stone's throw away from the city, but literally deep into the woods. Alas, we finally located the small house the carpenter must have been talking about. It was illuminated by a small light bulb and in front of the shed stood a frail old woman. Finally, another human being in these dark woods. Bianca heaved a sigh of relief. I parked in front of the dilapidated small house and not far from it, I spotted what seemed to be the cabin we rented out. It looked a lot more worn out than the pictures in the listing on Airbnb, but I was in no position to complain. After a long drive, I just wanted to have a peaceful night and have some drinks with my friends. As we alighted, the frail woman approached us with a sinister smile etched on my face. The way she was eyeing us made me uncomfortable instantly. There was something off about the gleam in her eyes. Welcome, I'm Mayella, the caretaker. She ushered us into the home and we wasted no time in settling in. After she explained that she would just be next door, in her home, she headed towards the door to give us the space. Enjoy. She croaked, her voice slightly cracking. It was high-pitched and, as with everything about her, made me utterly uncomfortable. While Bianca prepared the dinner we had packed, I quickly settled into our shared room. The cabin had 2 rooms and we decided that Bianca and I will share a room while Chelsea and Dixie will share the other. After putting my bags down and tidying up a bit, I went out of the hallway and spotted a mirror. I took a quick peek, only to see how exhausted I looked. I was just retying my ponytail, eyes fixed on the mirror when I spotted Mayella standing at the end of the hallway, a few distances behind me. I jumped at the sight of the old lady just standing there and observing me. Yes? I tried to ask politely and I turned around to meet her gaze. But as soon as I turned, she was gone. There was absolutely no one there. I shook my head in disbelief and slapped my face gently. It's just exhaustion. It's just exhaustion, I repeated to comfort myself. Addie, dinner's ready. Bianca called out and we all headed towards the kitchen where we unwinded over the food we brought. We were in the kitchen late into the night, playing games and drinking some beer. After the long drive and the frightening atmosphere we had to endure to get here, the least we could do is treat ourselves to a fun game night. Being with my best friends was a relief as I swiftly forgot about the creepy encounter that I had with Mayella in the mirror earlier on. Before long, we all treated to the bedrooms as we were warned from the happenings earlier in the day. Despite our initial discomfort in the house, Bianca and I slept almost as soon as our heads hit the pillow. A few hours later, however, I jerked awake. It was not usual for me to wake up in the middle of the night as I was a heavy sleeper, but I eerily woke up at exactly 3 a.m. based on the bedside table. I plopped back down with the full intention of returning to sleep when I caught a figure in the far corner of the room staring at me. At first glance, the silhouette looked precisely like Mayella's. I shook my head profusely, refusing to believe what I was seeing. What could that woman possibly be doing here? When I opened my eyes, she was gone. Impulsively, I got up and decided to check out the other room as she might be lurking there. I should warn Chelsea and Dixie. But what if that was either Chelsea and Dixie? It was unlikely, though. What could they possibly be doing in mine and Bianca's room at that hour? My suspicions were confirmed when I entered their room and they were dead asleep. I also peeped into the living room, but no one was there, so I decided to go back to the room I shared with Bianca. On the way back, I could not help but hear pronounced footsteps behind me, but when I turned back, no one was in sight. Terrified, I tucked myself back into bed and laid there awake while I waited for my friends to wake up. As soon as the sun rises, we were fleeing this place. Not only is the facade extremely ominous, but even that old lady was making me uneasy. When Bianca and the rest of the girls finally woke up, I hurriedly told them of my odd encounters and we collectively decided to pack our bags. We did not even bother having breakfast as we just wanted to flee as soon as possible. Just as we were about to head out to the car with our bags, however, Mayella flung open the door, with a plate of bacon and eggs in hand. "Where are you girls off to so early? You must eat first," she said in her raspy voice. She laid the plate of food, and while exchanging glances, we hesitantly ate the breakfast she had prepared. As soon as we were done, we brought our bags out and I asked Bianca to approach her and pay her. I was not going near that lady after my encounters last night. Thankfully, Bianca was willing to hand her the rent for the cabin. Bianca then hopped into the car where Chelsea, Dixie, and I were waiting. But just as I was about to drive away, the car would not start. How rotten could our luck possibly be? "Hold on, my husband can help you," Mayella offered as we four alighted the car and attempted to diagnose the damage. "He'll help you tow your car to the mechanic in town and off you girls go. Wait here." Shortly after, a rickety pickup pulled up in front of the house. None of the girls wanted to ride shotgun and I also had my reservations, but I had no choice. After all, my car was the one that broke down. So after securing it to the pickup, and letting Mayella's husband's car tow it, I decided to take the front seat. This was out of sheer desperation, and if we turned down this odd woman's help, we may never get out of these woods. We just wanted out as soon as possible. "Hey there," said Mayella's husband as soon as we boarded the pickup. Imagine the fright I felt when I recognized his face from the night before. It was the same man who gave us directions on the main road, and it was also the same carpenter who gave us even more directions. And he was driving us away. Story 3. The Bridge. When I was 10 years old, my grandmother passed away and we had to go to a different state for the funeral. Gran did not have any siblings, but I had heard that her brother passed away when he was my brother Stephen's age. Stephen was 16 at the time that Gran died, and we did not get along at all, as is natural with siblings. At the small ceremony, there was my mom, dad, Stephen, me and a few cousins along with Gran's friends from town. Gran lived in a very small town with only old people and no one mine or Stephen's age, which was why we did not want to go to the funeral. Yes, it sounds bad right now, but when you're a kid, your mind can be sort of one track. By being there, I was going to miss a very important comic book convention. My mom had promised me that we would be 2 days tops, then we would go back home. But then, apparently, they still had to meet with a buyer for Grandma's house because the previous one withdrew their offer, so we had to stay for longer. I had no phone, a few comic books and my brother, so we would go into the woods often for little adventures to pass the time. The rule was that my brother was not allowed to leave me at any time. Anyways, my brother became friends with this other older guy, and I would go into those woods alone. There was a very old bridge in the woods, which looked like it was going to fall apart at any time. My dad warned us not to go on it because it was unstable. I got into a fight with my brother over him not wanting to take me with him. I remember that I stormed off to the woods, upset at my parents for keeping us a week longer at that place, and my brother for ditching me once again. Like the stupid little kid that I was, I decided to cross the bridge to see what was on the other side. It was a bit creaky and old, but I managed to pass it. Under it was a river that I remember hoping not to fall into because I could not swim. And neither could my brother because our parents never taught us how to. Anyways, on the other side, nothing was interesting, except some grass and trees, so I decided to rush back home. I made the mistake of running through the bridge. Most things about that week are no longer clear as I am now 18 years old, but I remember this so clearly. I can tell you, that the worst way to die has to be drowning. The bridge gave in, and I fell into the water. The water filled my lungs and then I felt like I was going to explode. I tried to scream but my lungs filled with water. Just when everything was turning black, someone pulled me out of the water and started to pat me on the back. Once all the water was out and I could barely breathe, I saw that it was my brother. I was so happy to see him, but he scolded me just like my dad would. No matter what I did, my brother never scolded me like that. He told me to listen to my father and never try to cross a bridge so old again. He asked me if I had not been taught to swim, but when I was about to answer, he was suddenly gone. Not even 2 minutes later, he was back with our parents, wearing different clothes, and they were all fussing over me. I told them that Stephen had saved me, and they did not need to worry. But they said that Stephen had been with them, and they had been searching for me for a long time. And Stephen could not swim, so how could he have saved me? Stephen even denied being with me, but our parents thought that we were both being silly, so to end the matter, they decided to ground the both of us. I kept on insisting that Stephen saved me until he finally admitted to it. But later on, he spoke to me and swore that it was not him, and he told the parents that because it seemed like the only way to get us into less trouble. It had worked because we only had to do hard labor with our father and then we were let off scot-free. Stephen told his friend Michael about it, and he said that the bridge used to be active a long time ago, but there were a few kids who swam in the river that led to the bridge, and they had drowned. The bridge through the woods had not been used for a very long time because of how unstable it had gotten. Stephen and I thought that maybe the ghost had saved me, but our parents thought that it was Stephen who had helped me. Part of the hard labor was helping to sort through our grandmother's old stuff, and it was a lot. She was such a hoarder. There were even baby pics of Dad, his school reports, and lots of clothes. It was when we were sorting through the box that we came across a photo album, and on the cover was a eulogy. I could not read that well, but my brother could read that it was my grandmother's brother's eulogy. He drowned while swimming in the river that went under the bridge when he was 17 years old. Then, we started going through the photos, and there was one caption that it was my grandmother and her brother. He looked just like Stephen. We were so spooked out when we saw that, and we immediately showed our mom and dad. They explained to us that kids could look like distant relatives because it was just genetics. But their likeness was so startling that I believed it had to be him who saved me. Stephen and I know one thing though, my great-uncle had been the one who saved me and warned me on that day. But our parents would never believe us. They think that ghosts are not real. My brother thought it was cool that I had just been saved by a ghost, and he told Michael, and once again, we went into the woods without our parents' permission. For me, I went along because I wanted to be part of something that they were doing for once, as they always excluded me from everything. There was no plan, so they just shouted "Ghost, ghost." But nothing happened. We stayed there for a while, and we even shouted help to trick him into appearing, but he never responded to us. It seemed that he was never going to appear. So then, we decided to leave, but as we were leaving, we heard a splash. But when we turned around, there was no one. The others thought that it was me because I was at the back, but I did not throw a rock into the water. They laughed at me and said that I had made everything up, but we still quickly got out of there. Every time I talk to Steve about this, he tells me that a stranger saved me, and I hallucinated that it was him and that Dad had explained why he looked like our grandmother's brother. The house was sold in the end, and we went back home. I told my friends back home and they told me that I was just making things up. I do not think I'm crazy. It really was a ghost that saved my life. But that scary experience was enough to make our parents send us to swimming lessons once we got back home. And I learned to always listen to my dad when he told me not to do something. I did not want to end up nearly drowning ever again, because that is the worst feeling in the world. When my grandmother's house was sold, we never went back there again. But we did keep some of the pictures that my grandmother had. Every time I looked at the picture of her brother, I felt a sudden chill. His eyes were so familiar. I ended up packing his pictures into the garage, and I forgot about him for a very long time. It was only a week ago that I saw the picture and I remembered everything that happened. Sometimes I think of going back to that bridge and seeing if he is still there, or maybe I was saved by a stranger who I mistook for my brother. I guess I will never know. Story 4. The house we were tricked into buying. Like most people, I did not really believe in the paranormal, and I dismissed everything as being just a coincidence. 4 years ago, when I was 16, we moved to a new city and my parents bought a house. It was a very old house, with many rooms and better than the last one. My parents bought it at a reasonable price, and we were so sure that we had gotten lucky. So, we moved in the summer of that year. An important detail is that my sister, who is a year younger than me, has a very strong intuition which tends to spook me out at times. On the first night that we were there, she could not sleep. She kept on saying that someone had opened her window and she was hearing footsteps. She ended up sleeping in my room because of how scared I was. I even told her that she was probably hearing ghosts as a joke. But she told me not to say things like that. I made friends with some of the local girls, who were shocked that we were staying in that house. They said that a great tragedy had taken place where 15 years before, a newly married woman mysteriously died. Her husband was a suspect, but he never got charged because there was also no proof that he would want to harm her, but the one suspicious thing was that apparently, the house was hers. He tried selling the place for many years, but the people he tried to sell to experienced strange happenings in the house and did not want to buy it. Until he sold it to my parents, and because they were from out of town, and they did not know the stories. I laughed it off because there was no way that ghosts existed, right? Our so-called ghost was very subtle in her haunting. My sister reported that she felt strange darkness in her room and wanted to be moved, but our parents thought that it was ridiculous, but the look of fear in her eyes made me partly believe her. Usually, when she had a bad feeling about something, she was right. One night, I slept in her room just to keep her calm and convince her that everything was okay. Her room was deadly cold like a crypt, and I have never forgotten how it felt. But I wanted to be strong and prove to her that there really was nothing going on in her room. I drifted off to sleep until I felt as if someone was sitting on me. I could not move or breathe for a few seconds, not even to call the parents. When I opened my eyes, I saw that my sister was at the window once again, which was open. She came over to me and started asking me if I had seen and heard it. As soon as I was able to breathe again, I screamed for our parents. I was so spooked out that I asked them to sell the house and let us move somewhere else. My parents were very mad at both of us and thought that we were just trying to act up so that they could let us return to our old town. They agreed to let my sister change her room as long as we stopped talking about it. My sister agreed and the room was closed off, and those strange happenings did not happen again for a while. But once in a while, a window would randomly open, or I would feel a slight chill. But the strange thing was that neither of my parents could feel the coldness. I started reading up on ghosts, and I was faced with the possibility that they could have been real. But I did not know if it was a good ghost or a bad ghost, and if we should even mess with it. So, my sister and I did something I would not recommend you to do, and that was to buy an Ouija board to try and communicate with the spirit. I do not know if the answers we got from the board were real or not, maybe it was just a coincidence. However, as we were asking this spirit questions, it said that it was a good spirit. We asked for the name, and we got S in return. Whenever I tell this story, I get looks like I am lying, but is it really a coincidence that the young lady who died/was murdered 15 years age's name started with an S? I think not. I remembered that the girls had said that she was murdered, so I asked the question, but she did not reply. We asked who hurt her, and that should have been when we stopped the whole thing. She said W, which was not the first letter of the man who had apparently murdered her. We stopped and laughed about it, thinking that we just read too many R.L. Stine books and there was not actually some lady who had been murdered in the house. We put away the Ouija board and did not even think about it for a while. That was until a year after we moved there. Our parents wanted to paint and renovate the house as it was a bit old and creaky. The windowsills were made of wood and due to weather, they were not holding up. So, they opened up the house to the renovators, who started work on removing the windowsills. One evening, I was passing by the room that used to be my sister's one, which was when I felt almost as if a force was pushing me to open the room. That darkness that my sister used to feel rolled over me in waves. I could not get myself to move anyway, except for that window in the room where my sister used to sleep. I opened the room, which was empty, save for the forever open window. I went to stand by the window and looked out of the house. Then I traced the bottom with my hands until I touched something I had never noticed before. Underneath the window was something that was glued to it, like a small pouch. I detangled it away from the window and opened it. I sent a text to my sister to let her know that I had found something in the room. She came into the room a few minutes later, and I showed her what I had found. It was a diary entry and a letter. It was so disturbing. That particular entry was about a woman who was not happy in her marriage and wanted to divorce her husband so that she could own all of her property. She admitted to overhearing him plotting to get her killed and named a specific man. It ended off with the chilling words, "He wants me gone. I do not have long left." Then the letter was one from her lawyer confirming that she was trying to leave him. It was all too much and too dark for me, and I shouted at my sister for pulling such a prank on me. I was sure that she planted the letter there to drive me insane and that she was the one opening windows. But the way she looked so spooked told me that it was not her. So, it could have been someone from the neighborhood, or S herself, from 15 years ago. And that was why the windows were always being left open, and her answer to my question made so much more sense now. The W was for the window. We immediately went to our parents with the letter and diary entry and told them our theory. They dismissed our claim for the supernatural, but could not deny that if this was true, this would be evidence that she was actually murdered by her husband. We were shut out when our parents informed the police of what was going on. Then they asked me many questions and I told them the truth, but I could see that they thought my sister and I were not okay in the head. But then, the man who she mentioned turned out to be a very old friend of her husband who left town soon after her death. Coincidence or not? My parents got a bit scared about the investigation, so as soon as we could, they put the house on the market, and we left. They only managed to sell it to some historian obsessed with the paranormal months later. The funny thing was that all the funny things stopped when S's husband confessed to killing her and was sentenced. My parents still believe that it was a coincidence that I found the evidence, but I think not. My sister and I are the only ones who believe what happened, and I do not care. I know that S led me there. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.